Welcome to DnDTime Talks. It's a show where we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Pete.
And I'm Jeremy.
Jeremy, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing all right, Pete. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing just fine. And I hope that some other people that are doing fine are Sword Cohere, Bionic Shiva, Reflected 10-8, Vassals Aju, Blood Deuce, Diadems, and Maddie Morgs. Hello, all.
I'm trying to pantomime you. I hope it comes out all right. It might just look stupid.
No, I think you looked incredible, Jeremy. I think you looked lovely. I was watching
Thank
it
you,
just
Pete.
now.
I appreciate that.
Oh.
Hello, chat. I'm also saying hello to you. Pete, I just already asked you how you're doing. I got all distracted because I pantomiming instead of paying attention.
I was just saying names. There wasn't much to pay attention.
Yeah, I'm still. You know how it be. You know how it be when it do.
Oh, I absolutely. If there's anything I know, Jeremy, it's how it be.
Well, it didn't beep. All right, I'm going crazy, guys. I'm going crazy.
Is Data going? You bringing Data to work? I hear Data in the background.
Oh, I don't think so. He walked away. He got mad at me.
Oh well.
Anyway, yeah. So Pete, what are we doing? What is this show that we're? Oh, he's right here. What is this show that we're doing?
We're talking about Dungeons and Dragons stuff. We're talking about running DMing and how to do it. And specifically today, we're speaking about how to DM for power players or players who are more focused on the kind of mechanical aspects of the game and building big, scary characters, maybe more so than the RP side of things. And just to say get ahead of the curve, I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later. That isn't to say that one who is a power player can't be other things. And we're not trying to create a pigeonhole that if you're a power player, you're that. But yeah, we're going to be talking about how to run a game for someone who kind of enjoys that aspect of the game, the more combat side of things.
Yeah, and Data's being trained to go sit up there when he hears "Welcome to DnDTime." Now, I really like power play. I frequently power play when I make characters, and it's not that I don't also RP. I just feels good to be strong. I usually try and make more janky stuff really good. That's really the way I like to do it. It's like a challenge for myself. But a lot of people have lots of different reasons for wanting to power play. And yeah, it's a really interesting discussion, and I'm really excited to talk about it. And chat, if you're also excited to talk about it, then talk about it. Type along, let us know your thoughts. We'll respond and add to the conversation. And by the end of today, we'll have a lot to say about power playing, or not power playing, but DMing for power players. And so, Pete, you want to take us right in?
I also just want to say, as one last note, let us know not only about that, but go on our Discord and ask us questions and ask Pete and Jeremy under DnDTime Talks on Discord, because we answer those at the end of the stream, and that's always a fun little segment where we answer whatever silly questions, be they D&D related or not. So check that out as well. But yeah, let's get into the topic proper. So we've been talking a little bit about power plays. We're going to be going over some different ways to make the game mechanically interesting for people that enjoy that more kind of combat and that power gaming, so to speak. But I think there's a lot of things about running a game for someone who likes that aspect of gameplay that are actually really counterintuitive. And one of the core of those things is that, in a lot of places, there's this instinct that you want to, if they enjoy making really powerful characters and really optimizing themselves, they probably want a big challenge, which in some cases, actually, they want the opposite. And we'll be going over that quite a bit. But first off, we should probably define a little bit more clearly what it means to be a power player. I was throwing that one over to you, Jeremy. Hello? Can I be heard?
Yep, I tried to. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, Data stomped all over my thing and turned off my microphone. I actually picked that up exactly where you tossed it off. It was just silence.
The feed.
Yeah. So a power player is someone who just really enjoys the combat side of Dungeons and Dragons. They love optimizing characters. They love being powerful. And generally speaking, but not always, they prefer the combat aspect of the game to role play, exploration. the two other main pillars of this game. They also tend to like it a lot more than maybe even the story, right? Or the depth of character, which are two more abstract things about storytelling. But yeah, you don't have to build an optimal character to be considered a power player. You just have to build an effective one. For information on building effective characters, you can check out our other DnDTime Talks some time ago. Other ways people define or describe power players, you may have heard the term min-maxer or munchkin, and those are also common terms that people use when referring to people who like to power game. So, Pete, what does a power player really want out of a game? We mentioned, of course, just feeling strong, but what else?
Certainly. That's one of the first things that you need to ask yourself, I think, when you're just talking generally about, like, when you're thinking about who you're playing with and who you're running the game for. You have to think about what it is that they're going to, like, expect and enjoy out of the game. And we've kind of established now, we've said a power player, they want combat. They want to feel strong. But the question is more like, not what do they want in terms of just, they want to fight things. Why do they want that? And I'd say there's probably two answers to this. And the first is the possibility. I mean, you're going to get some players that do enjoy the more kind of challenging aspects of things. And also you're going to, get players that enjoy that more, improving their strength and just feeling, the power fantasy, because D&D is that in a lot of places. You get to role play as, you very rarely do you see people role play as, I am just a peasant with a rake. D&D doesn't really allow you to even play characters like that. You're inherently playing a powerful character. And that feeling of power is, I think, a huge draw to a lot of people. And really kind of figuring out for your players, figuring out where that line is and which one they kind of want over the other one is pretty important, I think. Because I was just gonna say, no, just a last statement. Because when you're building a character and they're building a powerful character, that's kind of them saying in a lot of ways, I want to be better than what my opponents are. I want to be able to overcome my opponents easily.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting kind of counterintuitive, almost opposites there, right? You want a greater challenge, but you also want to win. That's why you built a good character. If you wanted to lose, you would have built a bad character. And so one of the big things you really have to consider when you're DMing for a power player is you have to consider the difficulty of your encounters, right?
Yeah.
This is the primary area of adjustment in a game, but in a lot of ways, it doesn't actually differ, I think, from what you want to do in a normal game for anyone else. It's just you're scaling everything up a little bit. So, you want to vary difficulty. You want to put more emphasis on encounters that the players are able to trample over. That way they can feel really good, right? So if you have a normal party that's not power playing and you put in, I don't know, 6 guards and they're level 2, and the players can trash those 6 guards. Or, I'm sorry, the players have a hard time fighting with 6 guards, probably, because that's actually a pretty hard fight for level 2 characters. But you have your optimized power playing, your druid, barbarian, level 2 monster, whatever optimal thing they've built.
Oh no, not the barbarian, Jeremy.
They'll just wreck those guards. And that's okay. It's okay to be putting those, weak encounters in there, so long as you have stronger encounters later on to kind of vary that up. Of course, you still need that challenge just to give their strength, like, context, right? If they're just waltzing around killing everything, I mean, that's fun. Some players really enjoy that, but they need a challenge every so often to really give them a point of comparison. It's like at level 20, yeah, you can go fight all the young dragons in the world, but you need that Tarask to say, like, all right, there are still threats to you. Because when there's no threat, there's no, how do you put it? There's no stake. And so that's something really important to consider. And actually, I wanted to point out a question Psychopath thing in the chat. Just because the DM gives you XP, it doesn't mean you need to take the XP. My monsters hit the guy doing 100 damage per round. Oh my god, what?
I think he was saying that.
Paladin Bard?
I was thinking what he was saying was that when he runs monsters, they always attack the person that's power gaming.
Oh, lol. I mean, that can be a way to do it. But it's important to also read the player. Some power gamers want to feel powerful, and they don't want to feel like they're being singled out because of that. Whereas other ones will love it. They'll see that as a personal challenge, like, ha, the dungeon master specifically targeting me because I'm so awesome. You know, I like,
you can't keep me
that's
down.
Not a joke. That's like a legit. That it's a feeling that some power players will get in that case. So it's important to figure out which kind of player you're playing for. Is your player going to be upset that you're doing that, or are they going to love it?
And as a DM, in a lot of places, and this sounds like you can kind of be very much like the parent, and I almost recommend that you take on this attitude, very much like the parent who lets their child win at board games, where as a DM, like, it's kind of can be like really satisfying for players when you go into those encounters and being like, or even after the fact, after the encounter, being like, man, I thought there was no possible way that you guys were going to win that. Like, I put so many more goblins. I was like 100% certain this was going to kill them. That kind of like, almost hedging it and kind of saying like, oh, you guys were exceptional in the way that you overcome this challenge that, maybe you did. I think that happens to me personally a lot. I actually am always surprised at how much more powerful players are than you would expect them. But even doubling down on that and kind of like leaning into it, like, yeah, I couldn't believe that you actually took down that Yeti in a single massive strike with your Hexblade Warlock, Paladin, Sorcerer, or whatever terrible thing abomination class that has been created.
Yeah, Psychopath, that sounds terrifying. What are they? How does that even work?
Oh, Hexblade Bard. That's what it was.
I guess it's just smite for days, right? I don't even know. God damn. But another great comment from Bionic Shiba. Instead, put in 12 guards with lower stats to increase the pub's stompiness. I love that comment because that is a really great way to keep the difficulty pretty comparable, but still let them feel good. If you have a player who has that power fantasy and wants to wreck all of their foes, it's a really, really easy thing to do, right? Then rather than having, 12, rather than having, 2 10 hit point guards that hit for 4 damage, to instead have 4 5 hit point guards that hit for 2 damage, right? You have the damage, have the HP, double the number of guards, and the players will feel better and will feel more badass for overcoming a larger quantity of foes. Right, it just feels better to beat the overwhelming odds than otherwise. I mean, I think every player who's played a spellcaster remembers their first fireball into just a crowd of low-level enemies. Just die! I am a god here. Right? It's a feeling that even the non-power player in you, at least I maybe that's just the power player in me that's talking here, but I feel like even the non-power players can really appreciate that.
I want to point out a comment from Game Master's Vault here, which is when only a couple of players are power gamers and the rest of the group is not, it causes a lot of problems in a game. That can happen, absolutely. It's easy for someone who is choosing not to build effectively when kind of comparing themselves up against someone that is, to kind of feel inadequate by comparison, like, oh, well, they're kind of the real hero, why kind of sit in the back and occasionally cure wounds them because they're doing so much damage. And this is the kind of thing that, like, if, for example, if you're a power player, and we're very much of the camp here that there's nothing wrong with that, and it can be a really fun way to play the game. If you're a power player, that's the kind of thing you want to talk about at the beginning of a campaign and be like, hey, this is how I enjoy playing, because it does definitely feel bad if one player is just in it for talking to fun NPCs and goofing around in town, and one player wants to go out and slay goblins. Even beyond just kind of the feeling of inadequacy that can be created, just like the divergence and what they want to be doing most of the time.
Well, and to go further onto that, right? Pete mentioned a really great point. A lot of these issues, like that specific problem, can be super easily alleviated at session 0.
Yep.
Before the game even starts. A lot of people think that session 0 is just about flushing out backstories, but it's also a very meta time. It's a place where you should have these very meta conversations of like, this is what I enjoy, this is what I'm looking for in the game. Because you're about to get into a long-term relationship with everyone you're playing with. And you want to make sure that you're all ready for that level of commitment. And you all want the same stuff. But beyond that, even if we do have a situation, right, where 2 players in a group of 4, let's say, are very much power gamers, and the other 2 aren't, the first way to alleviate that, right, is make sure the players are better at different things. I really, really love the mantra, like, make sure that everyone has their place to shine. If one of the non-power gamers is a wizard, and then the other 2 and the 2 of the power gamers are like a paladin and a fighter, that wizard has a place to shine in, casting fireball or in any area of effect ability to kill lots of little foes.
Mm-hmm.
The same kind of deal, enemies that maybe would be resistant to a bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing attack. In the player's handbook, or in the monster manual rather, there are no monsters that are just flat immune to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, or resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. But as a DM, it is absolutely within your rights to say, yeah, this stone golem takes half damage from martial attacks. That's just how they work. And they're more vulnerable to magic because they're made of magic. Like, you can do that. Oh, do Black Pudding have them? And I know Swarms also do. Psychopath. I apologize. You've defeated me.
The Black Pudding.
Even Pete and I do forget things sometimes. But it's always important, right, as a DM, to know what your players excel at and give them the opportunities to excel. So
that's great across the board. Power gamers or not, for sure. Let's
you need to be a little more focused about it when you have a mixed party, because you need to make sure that those non-power gamers have their opportunities to excel. Like, you really need to make sure, because they're not gonna excel in most combats. Mind flayers are a great thing I like to use, especially when you have, I use the wizard as the example, right? The wizard or the arcane trickster, or really anything that has any class that has some intelligence that isn't power gaming, to shut down the power gaming characters, which are typically like paladins, or sorcerers tend to be pretty power gaming, or warlocks rather. Mind flayers that deal attacks against your intellect, right?
So Jeremy, when I kind of am thinking power gamers, and like, well, I'm about to play with a bunch of power gamers. I have to run a one-shot for a whole bunch in a little while. And I think what I'm going to run, my thought is, oh, well, I already know the answer. I'm going to run a dungeon. Because dungeons are in a lot of ways, they're the power player dream. Dungeons are, it's the tradition of what Dungeons and Dragons is. You kill a bunch of things, you get the loot from those things, and you go through and are better at clearing the dungeon now that you have said loot, usually. But the thing that's great about this is dungeons allow a really unique opportunity that lets you test power players in a way that really like plays into what they enjoy about the game, which you've kind of established this idea that what they want out of the game is to beat stuff up really well and to be good at it and show how good they are at beating things up. This allows you to do that a whole bunch in succession, where you're testing them not on their individual encounters. They get to have the fun of winning all of their encounters, but you're slowly depleting them of resources by doing so. So you get to have this kind of test where it's not necessarily about your ability to take on this group of 6 goblins here at the start of the dungeon. It's about your ability to take on a ton of those groups of 6 goblins. So there's a lot of small successes that they get to revel in while being challenged in the kind of the longer scope of the dungeon.
Yeah, absolutely. And more on that, a lot of power gaming players, right? A lot of those, what they're called builds, right, are the way you make your character to be optimal or to be optimized. A lot of those builds are emphasizing a single big fight. They are very powerful in one prolonged battle against a single big enemy. And dungeons are a really good way, like people were saying, to have a lot of small battles so that even the non-optimized characters really have time to shine because they're not spending all of their resources all at once to be strong. Additionally, I really love, and Pete, I know you really love, putting in puzzles and traps and other things like that into your dungeons that aren't just I hack and slash my way through. So those, I think incorporating those kinds of things into your dungeons are also, again, a great way to make it a little more party, equitable to everyone. But yeah, I mean, overcoming a dungeon feels really good. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is long resting, and we're getting a little bit into mechanics here, but according to the rules, you're not allowed to gain the benefits of a long rest more than once every 24 hours of gameplay, of in-game play. Which that's a long time, and that's a rule that a lot of players just completely don't even know exists.
Wait. Are you saying? I'm sorry. 24 hours of in-game.
In-game, yeah.
Okay, never mind. For a second, I'm confused what in-game was, and I was like, wait. So you're saying that like the rules of never mind. I thought you were implying that the rules of 5th edition required you to time out your rests. I did know that rule.
Thank you, 12 for 10 cents. Thanks for the follow. But I was gonna say, I love actually sticking to that rule, especially when power like when you have power players, right, that make those super optimized kind of builds that are really powerful for one combat, and that's it. And then they'd rather just go and take a nap and wait for all their stuff to come back and go again. And a lot of those builds, whatever, or kind of optimized characters, and part of, I think, this is actually a big draw for a lot of people when they're power playing, is how can I build a character that is completely within the rules, right? They want to see how far they can stretch the rules and push the boundaries to create something that the game didn't expect. That's almost like a sub-archetype of power players, and I think it's one of the more common ones.
It's kind of, in my opinion, I would say it's the most fun way to power play, when you kind of find an interaction between abilities where the DM kind of goes like, has to reread over the rules. It happens sometimes where the DM will like, can I get a ruling on that? I want to see both of these abilities and read the text to see if they actually do the thing that you're saying. And then it turns out it does. Those are great moments for power players.
Yeah, and so don't be afraid to call them on it. But more than that, adhering to that long rest rule is a really effective way of not shutting it down. They still get to do their big combo. It's just they get to do it once. And then for the subsequent combats in the dungeon crawl, the other players get to feel powerful too. That being said, always make sure you do include the one big battle for the big enemy for the power player to beat down at the end. If that's what they're good at fighting, give them something they're good at some point. Because that feels good. It sucked to just be like, all right, well, the only ability check that I'm bad at, or the only saving that I'm bad at, is intelligence. So literally every save has been intelligence in this dungeon, right? They can feel a little bad when that's the case.
I frequently put challenges in front of players that I know they are absolutely going to stomp.
Absolutely.
And not only just for kind of power gaming, the satisfaction of it, even for players who more enjoy the RP side of things, it's really fun to role play your character kind of having that confidence moving into a situation. For example, putting, say for some reason, and this is an outrageous case, but it illustrates the example. Let's say your entire party has received a boon where they're immune to fire damage. Putting a bunch of fire traps in the dungeon is really fun, even though you know that they are completely ineffectual and they're going to mean nothing to the party. There's definitely going to be some moments where the players, kind of discuss their kind of like joke about it in front of each other, like, oh, it's a good thing it's a good thing the designer of this dungeon tried to kill us with fire. There'll be like a lot of those kind of comments, and that's fun gameplay, even if it's not challenging in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the this is somewhat along a different line from dungeons necessarily, but Psychopath made an interesting point with his in chat. He's talking about bugbears and their unarmed strikes, and he's saying 10-foot stunning strikes for bugbears because they have a 10-foot reach with their long and powerful arms. Is that bugbears are a race you can play? They're from Volo's Guide to Monsters. Well, one of the interesting things is rules is written, bugbears can grapple enemies at 10 feet away. And so if enemies don't have a reach of 10 feet, rules is written, they can't hit the bugbear. And this is a really important point for dungeon masters to consider is, does that make any sense?
And the answer is no.
Don't try and pick apart every little thing that the power player does, because a lot of the times they like getting away with certain things. They like those cool niche interactions. So don't go out of your way to shut them down. But when something is just too ridiculous, it's your job as dungeon master to make a ruling on that and to make a fair and reasonable ruling. If what's happening isn't making anyone at the table enjoy themselves less, I would recommend just letting it go. Let it happen because it's fun. But if you see other people at the table who just feel inadequate because of a certain rules interaction that just has been going on that's questionable, it's entirely within your jurisdiction as a DM to say, like, hey, we need to talk about this because, first of all, it's a really questionable rules interaction. Secondly, it's making the game less fun for everyone else. And you're absolutely within your rights to do that, even if the book says you can do it. Even if Jeremy Crawford tweets about how, yep, that's how it's supposed to work, that none of that matters. Yeah. It's your game, you're the dungeon master, and your only job is to make sure everyone at that table is having fun, you included.
But as a caveat to that as well, I would save those for situations in which it is decidedly questionable. And that's not meant to say, like, if the person is really, I think a common one that's kind of contested over is sneak attack. If your player's a rogue and they're like, oh man, it's unfair that they're getting sneak attack so often, I'm going to say it doesn't work when you have advantage. Don't do things like that are just directly in counter to the rule. It's okay to make a ruling that's a little bit, maybe not exactly rules as intended when it's on the border, but don't just completely change mechanics that are part of the game, because that feels bad as a player for sure.
Exactly. You can't judge. And also, I guess along those lines, right? The only reason that as a player, as a dungeon master, you would think that the sneak attack is broken in that regard is if you saw it play like one time. If you watch a rogue player over a large number of games compared to any other martial character, the rogue is probably going to do actually less damage, generally speaking. They're going to be worse. That's just in my experience. And mathematically, they're just going to be less effective. Sneak attack doesn't do that much damage. But when you see sneak attack crit one time for 30 damage and kill your bad guy, you might think that. So I guess what I'm getting at is, if you are questioning some mechanic, first step is think to yourself, all right, I'm looking at one sample point. Think about how many times has this been a problem? Is this a recurring issue? Is this the first time I've noticed it being a potential problem? And then secondly, go and read it. Don't nerf things without first reading them.
Yeah, definitely.
Always give your players a chance to, show and read their spells to you and understand how it's supposed to work before anything else.
And learning kind of where to draw that line, that's a question of experience and just kind of feeling things out. And don't be afraid, like, if you are too harsh and you make a ruling at the table and then you realize later on, you know what, I've really kind of gutted what this player wanted to do. Don't be afraid to also reconsider and kind of go back on your decision when it's informed. You just have to kind of, feel these things out over time and kind of gain that experience.
Yeah, and I mean, Psychopath right there had a really great point in chat again. Another example is a counterspell countering a counterspell with your own counterspell while in the middle of casting a spell. Wow, that's a mouthful.
That works.
But it does work, rules is written. But as a dungeon master, you might say you're in the middle of casting a spell. You're already in another action. Can you take a reaction? According to rules, you can. But it's totally within your right as a DM to say, like, I don't know. That feels wrong to me. So think about how it's working compared with everyone else at the party. Especially if there's another player who could counterspell and feel awesome about that.
Yeah,
let them do it.
Also, then you get to save a spell slot.
Wow. Shh. We're not going to make the power player any better.
So to get, we kind of were talking about dungeons.
We got a little off track.
We've been on a good. It was a good off track though, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I like. Hold on a second. Matty Morg's comment.
Matty Morg, you son of a bitch.
Check the stack for spell resolution. Indeed. That is a Magic the Gathering reference for anyone unfamiliar with it. But we're talking about dungeons. We've talked a little bit about like the types of encounters that you'd put in, making sure you have a wide variety of them. But there's another aspect of dungeons that I think is equal in the power gamer's mind to the foes that they encounter, and that is the things that they get or the loot within the dungeon. And for the power player, gold, sure, that's great, but really what they want are magic items.
Yeah, absolutely.
Magic items,
and they want magic items that enhance their build.
Yes, they don't. Oh, yeah. Let's be clear. They don't want.
They don't care about your jar of mayonnaise.
Your alchemy jug. Yeah, they don't care about your what dimensional shackles or your bag of holding. They only maybe the bag of holding, but
actually I think they would, but for different reasons than you'd think.
Yeah, what they want are your +1 swords or your flame tongue swords or your +1 flame tongue swords, and making sure that you give power players these kind of items are fine. If you're playing with a group of players that loves, power gaming and wants to have like big kind of feel these incremental and like serious increases in power with their gear, it's okay to like, as long as like that that's the kind of game that you want to run, to just go wild and give out a lot of these type of items that are going to appreciably increase their kind of strength.
Yeah, and more than that, right? That's one kind of power gamer, is the I'm OP power gamer. But you actually find other types of power gamers as well. Another archetype is the I want to make the fastest character possible, or I want to make the blank character possible. Maybe it's the fastest moving character. Maybe it is the fastest flying character. Maybe it is the highest jumping character, right? You find power players who pick the highest passive perception character. You find power players who pick one thing.
I've done that one before.
That they just want to be unreasonably good at, just so you can never tell them no. And that's fine. That's awesome. Give them items that enhance that. Don't give them items that negate that. So if you have your character that's all about being really fast, like running real quick, they picked Centaur as their race. Maybe you give them the horseshoes of speed that they can actually use because they're a centaur, right? That's a cool way of making that character, they feel good. They get their cool horseshoes of speed. They're even faster. Don't give them the Cape of the Mountain Bonk, which lets them teleport as an action, because that does the opposite of what they want to run really fast. They don't want to teleport.
Yeah, Matty Morg's saying specific magic items are what power gamers like, ones that go in. Psychopath saying, I like effect items over +1 items. So much more fun. I agree with you. But I think there's a lot of people who would not and would rather just, for example, when given an item that maybe casts like a niche spell that might be situationally useful, I think there are a lot of players out there who would always prefer to have that +1 weapon over that kind of maybe more interesting but not as mechanically like strictly better. And that's one of the kind of things to consider. Giving people items that objectively improve their character can be really satisfying for a power gamer. They
love your cloaks of protection.
Yeah, cloaks of
Rings of
protection. All right.
Oh,
Yeah. +1 AC, +1 to all my saving throws. I'm just better now. I had a +1 weapon. Now I have a +1 weapon that also does another thing. My weapon has gotten better. I throw away my old one, put it in the trash. I hate that weapon. Now this is my weapon forever. Until obviously you find the next thing. And kind of a clever thing you can do as a DM is having a lot of really small increases in magic items. It's hard to do it without being too noticeable about it, but you can like intentionally put things like this is just slightly better than the last thing that you kind of picked up and found. And you know, if that happens too often, they'll catch on to it and realize it. But you can do that to a certain extent.
A lot of the times I find the power games really love that. I personally really love that. It's like, yes, my sword does an extra d6 of damage and it puts out fires. I like it. It's better than my other sword that just does a d6 of damage. Screw this other sword. I put out fires now, boys. Ice brand for life. It's good shit. Now,
Yeah.
speaking of loot and magic items, the worst thing you can do, don't take away a power gamer's item. That's just rude.
Unless they deserve it.
You know,
I'm joking.
If it's part of the story and it is dramatically appropriate to do so, you can do that kind of stuff. I know I was running a campaign not too long ago where one of my players who really has that power fantasy, right, that's what they love out of Dungeons and Dragons, had found a questionable bag of holding that definitely was not a bag of holding. It was a portal to somewhere. And he just stashed all of his stuff in it, knowing it was dangerous. And eventually all of that stuff was lost. And it was dramatically appropriate when that happened. And so that became a cool, like, vengeance quest for that character who had already replaced all of the items that they had been stashing there. But it's just a matter of principles. Like, you stole my magic item, you know, make it worthwhile. I would never wholesale take away their kind of stuff. One of the cruelest things that you can do against a power gamer is putting oozes against them. And you know, putting oozes against them is terrifying. It's horrifying for them. Oh, my armor's gonna get destroyed.
My plate, not my plate.
Yeah, keeping that stuff in mind.
I absolutely agree with you on that, Jeremy. That's just mean. Usually it feels less like, you know, interesting and more like I'm trying to punish you for being too strong, which is, you know, should never be your goal as a DM.
Oh yeah, rust monsters as well, Maddie Morgs. And yeah, if you ever catch yourself feeling like I need to remove blank, just stop. Be like, wait a minute. Am I being petty as a DM? And if the answer is even remotely close to maybe, really rethink what you're doing.
There's always there's always a way to counteract whatever the thing that you've done is in a way that doesn't feel bad for the player. For example, like, oh wow, this player has a +5 magic weapon and everyone's, well, I don't know how that happened, but and everyone else is got nothing. Well, I'll give everyone else +5 magic weapons and then make all my enemies have way more health. There's like other ways to account for it. You can balance the rest of your game around it.
Yeah, and so I think we're kind of closing up on loot. Did you have anything else to add to that, Pete?
No, not particularly.
So there was a comment a little while back I want to cycle back around to from Bionic Shiba. We were talking about rules, exploits, I guess you could call them, right? Strange mechanics that you wouldn't think work together. And Shiba was saying, and then the dungeon master does it straight back to you. And that's a really interesting statement because depending on the power gamer, they'll either love or hate that. A lot of power gamers, they make their super niche builds because they feel like they're being creative, right? They're being clever with how they're putting their character together. And in a lot of times they are. It's like, holy shit, I would never have thought to do that.
It feels cool when you have those. We're saying that before.
Exactly. It feels good to have something that feels unique. You know, other characters will come up with extremely elaborate backstories to make their characters feel really unique. making your character mechanically unique is another way that these people like to play, power gamers like to play. So when you just immediately throw it back at them, it's questionable. I wouldn't recommend doing that frequently, but for big bads, like big villains,
Yeah, a high impact moment.
absolutely.
It's worth it.
It's very much a touche, right? It's you're telling that player that was an excellent idea. I think I'll take it, right? It's like a sign of respect. If you just throw it on any old monster they run into, right.
Random Goblin 5 is also a Hexblade Paladin that can.
Yeah, it can be like, okay, sure, I get it, whatever. But when the big bad of the campaign does it, it feels a little different. And maybe it's not the big bad of a campaign; it might be the big bad of an arc. But I would just recommend doing that. Keep it for important, meaningful NPC enemies, because it's a sign of respect. It's saying like, yeah,
it's spice.
It's like I respect what you're doing. It's powerful. I dig it. Now you have to fight it. Plus all of their goons.
Yeah, and all the other things they can do.
Right. And that's dramatic as fuck. Pardon my language, but it's excellent. Because when the rest of the party realizes the big bad can do what that person does, they go, "Oh God, run away!" And then I'll tell you another thing, and I'm sorry to continue on this, but once you've shown that, hey, once you do something, so can other things in the world, you'll tend to notice that the power gamer will be a little more reserved in what they decide to try.
What they try and bring to the table. Yeah.
Yeah, they won't make as many stretches. And again, remember, you can scrutinize some of those mechanical stretches, but yeah, you'll find that everything's a little more reserved, a little more reasonable. And more than that, you'll find the power gamer coming up with tactics to overcome themselves. Which if you're not a tactically minded DM, nothing wrong with that. A lot of players just don't have that strategic tactical board sense. I mean, I'm not very good at it. Case in point, everything I do in DnDTime. I'd like to think I'm good at it, but I'm not. But that power gamer can help you out. They can come up with things that will beat their own strategies, and oftentimes they'll take the time to warn the rest of the party on how to do that. And just as a DM, just take note. Be like, yes, okay, that's how I counteract whatever.
Tactics are just another good thing to use on power gamers as well. We've talked a lot about like the easy difficulty. Having encounters that aren't necessarily like super difficult, but that have a tactical trick to them, that's something that the power gamer can kind of like figure out and overcome. Those are probably going to be some of your most satisfying encounters for your power gamer, is when not only do they feel like they've overwhelmed the combat with just the strength of their character, they also feel like they've overwhelmed it with their brain power as a human. Be it that they've used their ability, a simple tactic, and one of the most classic ones is, a character fires from behind range and then ducks behind cover. And there's a few simple solutions to that, and those are, the player waits for them to come out from behind cover to attack, or in some way removes that cover. And coming to either of those solutions, even though they're fairly simple, both of those are very fun as a player and make you feel like you're it makes you feel more justified in your victory in a lot of ways, because you've, outthought your opponent.
Yeah. And even like the weak enemies can do that. Even when players are level 5 and they have fireball and they can just wipe out a pack of goblins. A pack of goblins that play strategically, that's still a really engaging fight, and it feels rewarding for them to win.
Yeah.
And forget about whatever loot they get afterwards. Maybe the goblins have something cool. Oh, and that's something I love. We almost skipped over about loot. If you put magic items as the loot, as the reward, give those magic items to the enemies that the players are fighting.
That's just good combat advice, and on the whole. That's not even a power gamer thing. That's just do that anyway. If
there is a staff of power, that's the reward for, that is the treasure.
Make sure the enemy breaks it over their knee.
Oh God, I wouldn't say that much, but you bet your ass that Archmage is going to be using the Staff of Power. and do it. Like, why would they not be?
Yeah.
If there's a ring of protection, you bet that enemy has that ring of protection on.
Yeah, I better keep this staff safe so these adventurers attacking me can't get it. Just keep it over there on the mantle where they'll never reach it. That doesn't make any sense, and you won't see them do it. But Jeremy, before we because we're getting near the end, I also want to, yeah, we're moving right along. I also want to talk about, because running a game for power players, we've talked mostly exclusively about combat, but you also have to think about how to run like non-combat scenarios for a power player. And I think there's a great rule of thumb for that. In situations that rely heavily on RP and more social encounters, because, you know, even if you're running a combat-centric game, odds are there's going to be situations in which they're going to need to do some bartering, some negotiation, some, you know, get information and interrogate whatever it is that they are trying to do. If your power players are the kind of power players that also don't really enjoy the other pillars and aspects of the game, and first we'll focus on RP here, we can also talk a bit about exploration and how to kind of deal with that as well. In RP situations, allow them to let the dice speak more for their abilities than necessarily their role playing. In a lot of heavy role playing games, I personally will, if I have a group of players that I know enjoy this aspect of gameplay, I will oftentimes have them go through entire social encounters without rolls, and I'll judge them not necessarily based on like, I'll judge them just based on, do I think with their logic and what statements they've made, they were able to convince this person of this thing, and go by a much more kind of tactile, you actually have to try and persuade me. But I think a lot of power gamers and just a lot of players even wouldn't enjoy that kind of gameplay. And so just let a power gamer say like, all right, the merchant offers you 100 gold pieces for this ruby you found. I want to haggle with him. Can I roll a persuasion check? Just, yeah, you can. You can just roll a persuasion check and see if you're able to convince them. Don't kind of force RP where players that don't want to do that.
Yeah, and along the same lines, you know, in that same circumstance, if you tell the player, yeah, the merchant wants 100 gold pieces for the gem or whatever, the player might say, oh man, that's a lot. Don't be afraid to, like, especially if you know the player isn't super into RPing, don't be afraid as a DM to offer it up and say like, hey, if you want, you could roll a persuasion check to try and haggle with them. You can offer that up to them as well to engage them a little bit.
It's a great
without
point.
going too far, you know, over the top. And along that same line, sometimes you'll find those power players that really focus on their persuasion skill. No amount of persuasion will convince the king to abdicate and allow you to take over their throne, unless you're really high level and you're going to murder them and everyone else in the city. You know, you can't just crit your way to ruling a kingdom. Unless you're playing a real weird game, in which case, you know, follow your list, man, do what you want.
I feel like I see that in one shots every once in a while, where you crit your way to.
I've seen that.
The
that city ended up in flames.
No, that's a good. Oh no, poor city, Chan. That is a really good point, Jeremy. Don't let the dice control things too much. And those are the situations. I think we may have talked about this before, but those are situations where you just have to tell the player, it's not like that dice should never have hit the table to try and convince the king. At the time they were like, I want to roll and try and persuade the king into giving over the kingdom. You shouldn't have told them that they could roll the dice. You just should say it that before they even roll. That's not possible. Because once they've rolled the dice, there's all of a sudden this impetus on you, the DM, and them, the player, where they have this expectation. Well, if I do roll really high, it will work. Because that's how Dungeons & Dragons work. If I roll good enough, something can happen. So don't even let them roll that big dice in that situation. Is just another, again, tangent point, but an important one.
Yeah, and I think the last thing to wrap us up, before we move on to our segment, Ask Pete and Jeremy, a segment where you all can ask us questions on the Ask Pete and Jeremy text channel on our Discord server, links below, doesn't have to be binary like that, you know? Not every power player hates role-playing and exploring. Some players like to power game and have a rich character backstory and like to explore and like to do all sorts of stuff. In which case, you're set.
It's
Everything's
rare.
great.
It's very rare to find I think any player who doesn't enjoy exploring. I would like to make a quick note on how to handle a player that doesn't enjoy exploring. If you have a party that they really just want to go to the dungeons, the trick is this, and it's one very key piece of narration. You can juxtapose this into your game. You travel through the forest and now are outside of the dungeon. You can just do that. You can just tell the players they're where they want to be and cut all of that out if it's not to their taste and you don't want to run any of that.
And if you have that awful situation where one player really hates the overland travel, but the other three really love it, sometimes that's just, you need to talk. You need to just sit down and you need to talk it out and be like, hey man, the rest of the party really enjoys this. Can we come to a compromise here? Or maybe I'm just not running the kind of game you want. And sometimes that's the case. It's not frequent. I feel like most of the time it can be reasonably resolved in a way that's amicable to everyone. But, you know, sometimes that is just the case. You want to play an RP heavy game and all they want to do is murder goblins.
And I'm kind of the opinion, and I think it's true, that most players are definitely more well-rounded than the kind of player that we're talking about. The vast majority of players you're going to meet are, you know, even if they are power players, they're going to like lean in that direction. And like Jeremy was saying before, though, it's not, you know, a binary. They're going to have also some other aspects. I think a lot of people will compromise.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So with that, I think that wraps us up for Power Game.
I'm satisfied with all that we've said.
Thank you, everyone who's tuned in thus far. But now we will open ourselves up, open our very souls to you all as we talk about whatever people are going to ask us in this channel. So as I said before, if you have questions, you can jump onto our Discord server, type them in, and yeah, we'll answer them.
So without further
we'll ignore them if they're really offensive. So don't be really offensive.
That's true. That's true in all things related to this channel. But yeah, let's go into our first one. Farku asked, "Would you play a game I GM'd?" Yeah,
definitely. Farku, I would love to play in a one-shot you GM'd. I'm not sure if I'd love to play in a campaign. I'd need to play with you first, but I would love to play in a one-shot with you at some point.
100%.
That would be excellent. I'm a bit of a power gamer, and
I want to see. I do really want to see. I want to see the monsters that Farku creates, very much so, or you know, just the ones he chooses and how he builds an encounter.
I'm much more frightened, not of what Farku creates, but just of
the manner in which
the way the existing ones are put together.
Yeah, that's what I was just realizing as well.
Oh fuck. Dandere Ninja asks, or Vessels Aju in the chat asks, what is the secret to Bartholomew's long life? Does he use epic magic, spells beyond 9th level, to sustain his body? How did he obtain such power? Well, I mean, this is pretty obvious, Pete. I'll handle it. Bartholomew's a level 18 druid, guys. That's super easy.
Allow me to answer this question. I'm a very powerful wizard. I know all manner of spells and incantations and so forth. Yes.
There you go, guys. And actually, as an addendum to that, he also asks, what does Bartholomew use Lowwom's longevity to extend his lifespan? Link to the epic level spell. Probably not. I'm
familiar with this this spell. I do not employ that particular one to keep my skin as silky and beautiful as it is.
I was going to say, there's no way Pete is familiar with the Netherese period of the Forgotten Realms. I'm only hardly familiar myself.
Yeah, well, I'm not. Bartholomew is.
Of course. That's a good answer. Marty Matty Morgs.
What's an interesting barbarian you've played as, ran for, or encountered as an NPC, and what made him or her stand out?
I got one once. You can go first.
Okay. I'm going to cite Gurk the Drunk, which, when I say that this is an interesting barbarian, it was the most quintessential barbarian I've ever seen. It was just like the first time we played D&D. Card Watch, who we were playing with, hangs around this channel, might be here now, but plays with us on Sundays in Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Played Girk the Drunk, half-orc barbarian. They liked to drink and they liked to fight and get angry. The thing that like I really enjoyed about Girk the Drunk was their character arc, where they died in a fight and then became Girk the Sober. And it was watching that character develop and become starting out as like the quintessential barbarian and becoming a very interesting and atypical one that I enjoyed. I think they ended up like taking some monk levels at some point and became this very like introspective and kind of spiritual barbarian when they started out as just like a berserker.
There are two. One is one I've played, and one is one I've ran for. Pete, you're gonna have to remind me. Is it Nylock the Silent? What was his character?
NyQuil.
NyQuil the Silent.
The medicine. Yeah, I forgot about NyQuil.
NyQuil was a friend of mine back in college. Played this character, and man, NyQuil the Silent was excellent. It was just he's all about being very stealthy. He's just a very stealthy barbarian. He goes into his silent rage. He's just very angry and very antisocial, and it was just wonderful. I loved NyQuil the Silent. And I really loved playing Lurk. Just Lurk.
Oh God,
actually.
Lurk,
brother of Euchunkus. Not really though. But
was Lurk? Okay.
No, Lurk was a troll. No, I loved Lurk. Lurk, I had reskinned a bugbear into like a troll, and I completely power played that character, emphasizing and optimizing how much weight I could lift. And Lurk could lift, his maximum capacity was somewhere around like 8 tons or something. It was just outrageous. And it was just fun thinking about like, what stupid things can I do now that I can lift 8 tons? And it would be things like, I'm going to just put this marble pillar on top of someone. All right, they're not moving anywhere. Time to walk away. You know, it's stuff like that. I really enjoyed playing that character. Power playing can be fun.
It was a silly character.
It was a ridiculous character.
And I think our last question of the evening, what was a time where you made a DM call that you instantly regretted?
Oh.
I mean, there's definitely times. I mean, I feel like you remember, it's harder to remember the ones that you get that you realize you messed up immediately, as opposed to the ones that you kind of realize further on.
I actually know mine.
Do you want to go first then?
Yeah, mine, this is going to be a really unpopular opinion, but I think this is something really worth noting. We were playing in a game, and I was running some enemies, and they were homebrewed enemies, but I had their stats like written out. It weren't like I'm bashing it in my head on the fly. They were written out foes that I custom created for the campaign. And there was a point in the campaign where they were battling them, the players were battling them, and one of the characters died. One of the characters went down. And it was a really dramatic moment. It was some extreme tension. And we kept battling through, and they defeated the enemies. And I went back, and I'm like looking at the enemies, and I realized I had done something wrong. I had rolled the wrong hit die or the wrong damage die because they didn't have advantage on the attack. And it should have been D6s instead of D12s. And with that, the crit would not have possibly done enough damage to kill the player. And what I did is I went back on it, and I said, actually, guys, I messed up. You're not dead. And I regretted doing that because it was like 4 turns later.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone had come to terms like, shit, they're dead. It was dramatic. It had so much tension in the moment. And even though it was the fair thing to do, I think it lessened the gameplay experience, even for the person whose character died. Because, everyone had accepted what had happened. They were like, shit. And it was a situation where the players had been counting death saving throws and not bringing the character up went immediately because they're like, oh, they got 2 death saves left. The odds of them dying are they have to crit fail.
1 in 20, and then
yeah. And so they had been kind of gaming it a little bit, and then it was just like, oh shit, we've paid for our hubris. And yeah, I regret going back on that. As a dungeon master, especially when you're playing with any monster, forget about homebrewed creatures. The monster is what you say it is until you say I'm wrong. And so the monster was what it was until I went back on it. So, yeah, that's just something to think about. I regretted that in that moment. And I think it was, it feels like a cheap Deus Ex. Exactly. It's just not, it didn't feel good. The player wasn't happy. No one at the table was happy, even though their character wasn't dead.
Even though technically it was.
Yeah. If
it was correct, like by all intents and purposes, like it's the right thing mechanically, but it's just the wrong move.
In general, in my experience, and it's happened a handful of times, that couple turns was the most egregious. But I've made this mistake other times too, when it was just like still in the same round, but a couple of turns had passed. Maybe a couple more enemies or players had gone. And it's just like, unless it's egregious and you really botched it, how the dice fall and how things work out is how it worked. In the moment, that's how that monster worked. Even though it can suck to lose a character, I think every time I have gone back and been like, actually, wait a minute, guys, I screwed something up. They're still up. I have felt that it has lessened the quality of the game.
No, I don't think you were saying at the beginning that you thought that would be kind of a controversial opinion,
well, I mean, for players who don't want their characters to die, yeah. Oh yeah.
But as a GM,
I'm just telling you, I feel bad because I cheated you and then I fixed it.
Yeah.
But
as a GM though, that's definitely the right move is to not.
Yeah, I mean, and it can be real. Like there are different situations.
For my own experience, I was running a game. This was actually a pretty recent one. I remember one that happened pretty recently, and the party was in kind of a dungeon crawl. They split the party in a pretty major way, and they were also down to players. They were putting themselves in just a terrible, terrible situation. And a player walked alone into a room, and that room had in the GM layer. Yeah, I mean the room had in the GM layer a whole bunch of crabs that were buried underground.
Crabs?
It was a bunch of giant crabs, and they were slightly homebrewed. They weren't regular giant crabs. They weren't the hulking crab. They were like a crab that was in between.
And they also weren't huge giant crabs.
No, they were a homebrew giant crab.
They were large giant crabs.
Yeah, and basically, in the other room, the players were basically got into an encounter with an Umber Hulk, and then this other player goes into this other room that they're exploring at the same time, and gets beat up by a bunch of crabs. And my thought was, I had the crabs come out and attack, and in that moment, I decided to use the crabs as they were. And just have the crabs be I was like, well, you walked into it, so that's the encounter. And in that time, I wished I had just changed things behind the scene, either just not had the crabs popped up and just let the player go back and play with the other players in the other fight and, miss some of the encounter. And it ended up being a TPK because it was an impossible situation when I could have just not had that enemy even be there and let the player go back and rejoin the party. But in the same regard, I had a fear kind of like, basically I was fearing the thing that Jeremy said, which was now that I've introduced these crabs into the scene and shown that they were there, I didn't want to have the players think like,
you don't want to pull punches.
Yeah, I don't want to pull the punch. I just wish I had never thrown the punch to begin with.
Exactly.
That's an example.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Every time a DM, a dungeon master pulls punches, I just think that it doesn't work out well. If you obviously pull punches,
Rye Guy Big Boy was in that game.
Now, Rye Guy Big Boy, were you the one with the crabs?
Right Guy Big Boy was not the one with the crabs. He was the one dying to an Umber Hulk in the other room.
I apologize, Rye Guy Big Boy. Pete's an evil dungeon master who's just out to kill you.
Yeah, I have done this.
Well, anyway, I think that wraps us up for the evening. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, for, spending your time here and being all cool and stuff. We really appreciate you guys hanging out, spending your time here, being part of DnDTime, asking us these actually really great questions tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not a lot of questions, but high quality.
No, some solid ones for sure.
And for those of you who want more Dungeons and Dragons stuff, you can check out Matty Moores in the chat. We'll be hosting him here. Tonight is, I believe, his minis raffle. So there's going to be cool Dungeons and Dragons miniatures, kind of random boxes of them up for raffle that you could get. Maddie, I hope tonight's the night. Otherwise, I just totally threw you under the bus. But I'm pretty sure that's the case. Even so, Maddie does a lot of cool Dungeons & Dragons content, a lot of workshop stuff, kind of like what we're doing right here, but on a much broader scale with a lot more detail. I was right. Whew. I'm right. DnDTime character generation is what he's doing today. He's making characters just for Pete and Jeremy's D&D time. So
yes,
that's going to be awesome.
You may see me and Jeremy there on the stream as well. At least me. I don't know about you, Jeremy. I cannot speak for you. But
I've got something else going on. I might be able to stop by for a bit, though.
All right, cool. And also tune into our other content coming up on Friday.
We have other content?
I know, it's wild. And it's Pete and Jeremy's D&D time. It's on Friday. It's going to be at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Tune in. We play one-shots with our community and chat and people. You can sign up and find all the information on how to do that underneath the stream here on Twitch.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't aware, we have recently updated and upgraded our DnDTime spectator bot. The spectator bot might look the same in the Twitch chat, but it's very different. It's much improved. We've been looking into any potential qualms or issues it's had. It seems like everything's working 100%, so everything's great. And yeah, we've got a lot more cool updates down the road for D&D time, so it's gonna be exciting. My cat's very hungry. He's mad at me.
Also, for anyone who hasn't seen it on Sunday, we are not streaming on Sunday. We're taking the day off for Easter.
Yep. Both have familial obligations.
Indeed. So,
without further ado, I am Jeremy.
And I am Pete. And this is DnDTime Talks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.